I've since come to realize that that is uncommon, I think. Not a lot of guys were preaching their first sermon at 13. The first one went great. The second one was awful. I think I got a little cocky the second time around.
Welcome back to the Talk Midland podcast. My name is Logan Richetti with Mata Realty. Today I have my brand new pal, Philip Miles, Sunrise Church of Midland.
That's correct.
Nailed it.
Yeah.
First
Good
try.
job. Nice to meet you.
You do. You are the lead pastor, Sunrise Church of Midland. I'm in the market for a church. Can you tell us about Sunrise Church of Midland and your history and experience there?
Yeah, so I came to Midland in 2017, and shortly after that just became a member of the church. And I had been a pastor in Texas. That's a long story. Maybe we can get into that. But I had been a pastor in Texas, came here, and became a member of Sunrise. About a year after that, Sunrise was looking to fill a position, a lead pastor position, so regular preaching pastor. I had that experience, and so one thing sort of led to another, and I became the regular preaching guy in 2018. I've been there ever since. Sunrise is you said if you're looking for a place, right? Sunrise is a place where we probably run around mid 100s, 150, 160, depending on the Sunday, 180 on a good day, 190. Good collection of folks, man. They're super warm. One of the pieces of feedback we get about our church is that when people come, they feel like they were noticed, they were seen, and that somebody inevitably engaged with them. And so we're really interested in people, not people as resources to grow our church. We really just want to be there as a place where people can come, engage in worship, engage in community. And really what we say is we want to walk together with Jesus. Like we all want to do that together, and that's what we strive to do.
Coming up in a couple weeks, there's a big event for Easter.
Yes.
What do we have?
So April 20th is Easter this year, and we'll be hosting what we call an Easter in the Park at the band shell. So a little bit of dispute about what they call that. It's the Central Park band shell, right? Or it's the Nicholson-Gunther band shell, but we're telling everybody it's the Central Park band shell. And so 11 a.m. on Easter Sunday, we're doing something for the community for Easter. So decided that having something outside in the spring really says some things about Easter. Easter is just a new life and all of those things. And so Easter really is an opportunity, I think, for people that may be looking for a place to gather together, to worship, to celebrate Easter. We think, we decided doing it outside was a way for us to open that up to the broader community. I mean, literally no walls, right? Mm-hmm. And so for someone who might, on a day like Easter think, well, I think I should go somewhere and worship or celebrate this day in a religious capacity, but I don't know where, or I might be intimidated to walk through the doors of a place. We've sought to eliminate that obstacle by doing it outside at the band shell. And so, April 20th, 11 a.m. We're really excited to, live music, preaching. It'll be like church, but it'll be outside. And so we think it's going to be great.
Well, that's a very interesting concept. I haven't heard of that before. What's the address of that place? Do you know?
Man, you would ask. I think it's like 401 East Nelson. It's across the street from Central Park Elementary, so across Collins from Central Park Elementary.
Okay.
Right where the community center, well, it's right next to where the community center used to be, or next to a Miracle Field.
Okay.
So
I know where that is. Okay.
Yeah.
That's where there's a presentation. What do you call that?
It's the amphitheater there.
Okay.
That's where
All
we're
right.
doing it. So we'll be set up right there.
Okay, but that's not where your church is. Your church is...
Oh, I apologize. Yeah, our church is on Jefferson at 2138 North Jefferson. So at the corner of Jefferson and El Rancho.
El Rancho. Yes, I've driven by it many times.
Many people have.
Yeah. All right. There's a lot of churches in Midland.
That's true.
Tons of churches, a lot of options. But let's go back to this event for a minute because I'm going to bring the kids. It sounds like obviously a kid-centered event, but it's also going to be a service, outdoor service.
It is, correct.
And you're going to be leading it?
I am, yes.
What's the message?
The message is one of new hope, new life, resurrection. I know that those can sound like kind of Christian buzzwords, but that is what makes us Christians. We talk about that very openly. We would say that's what sets Christianity apart from so many other worldviews and world religions is certainly Jesus was a real man and he certainly died, there's no miracle in death. You'll die, I'll die, you know. But the miracle of all of that is that he was resurrected. And so it takes something significant for a man of that seeming insignificance in his life to change the world the way that he did through his followers. And they believe that, we believe that. And so that's what we want to celebrate in a public way and promote. And so that'll be that's the keystone, that's the touchstone of all that we're going to do that day, is make that really abundantly clear.
All right, so you came from Texas.
Yes.
You were a pastor in Texas?
That is correct.
My dad wanted to be a pastor when he grew up. That was always in his heart. I don't think he ever did, but that always stuck with me. And I'm fascinated by individuals who find themselves taking that path in life. And I believe, or at least it's been my experience, that there's otherworldly, influences that can lead somebody in that direction. Is that your experience as well?
Yes, I would say that is the case. So when I was a young man, I preached my first sermon when I was like 13 years old, which didn't seem out of the ordinary at the time. I grew up in a church that was really trying to teach young men we want to advance the ministry, and so you should consider these things. I've since come to realize that is uncommon. I think not a lot of guys were preaching their first sermon at 13. The first one went great. The second one was awful. I think I got a little cocky the second time around. But yeah, so as a young man growing up, or in the church, I was given opportunities to hone that skill, to be around the church a lot. I was close with my youth pastor, close with some other leaders in the church. And so through that experience, I would have told you when I was 15, I was being called to do that. And I think that's a right way to think about it. But for me, that wasn't like writing in the sky or anything that was, otherworldly in that sense. But it was this deep internal, like, I needed to give my life to something that was about more than just me. And it's funny, I had a conversation with a young man just yesterday, and he's in his first career, 22 years old. And he's like, I think I need to give my life to something bigger. And I thought, yeah, you might, and so I remember resonating with that and feeling that same feeling. And so that's what led me to study that in college. I went to college for Bible, pastoral ministries, and then came here. Actually, there's a lot more to that, but that's where I met my wife and all that stuff. So yeah, so studying ministry and preparing myself for all of the things that come. Like the calling was one thing, but there was a lot of training that came after, and then that's what led us to this day, in this place eventually.
What is it like standing in front of a congregation and actually performing a sermon? What does it feel like?
Man, when I was younger, I was nerve-wracked by it. These days, there's a weight to it. There's an immensity to, like, man, what you're telling someone, you believe has a value to it that is beyond just sort of informational awareness, right? And so there's a daunting reality to it. You want to get it right? You don't want to have to get up the next week and be like, I said a thing and I was totally wrong. But also there's a sense where the longer I do it each week with the same people, it's more like having a conversation at a family meal. And so I'm sort of sharing from the Bible what I think is useful for the people of our church, with the word of, what the Bible tells us. But I'm less concerned with performing for them and more concerned with, like, a lot of folks who are close to me will tell you I use the metaphor like of preparing a meal. Like I'm preparing a meal for these people, and sometimes it's a gourmet meal, it's delicious, and other days it's like mom made peanut butter and jelly, And so, but all in all, like that realization has helped me think through that for their benefit instead of concerning myself with how I did each week. Like how will this best serve them? And so that sense of concern for them, there's a daunting reality, but also because I'm engaged with our people on a week-to-week basis and it's familial and not performance, there's a lot of patience with me and grace, and they're phenomenal bunch of people, man.
Well, how would you advise a family looking for a church to investigate and ultimately select a church? What advice can you give someone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing, and really what I think doesn't, it's not necessarily what I think, but the best thing I think would be to assess what they teach based on what you understand the Bible to teach, right? So I don't think of the church as, I'll tell our church often, the church is not a vehicle for my personal ambition. I've worked in the workforce. I sold cars for a while. I've done all kinds of things. My dad's an entrepreneur. There's nothing wrong with personal ambition in those spaces. My dad has grown his company to be very successful. When I was selling cars each week, man, I had a family to feed, and we got to get after it. I hustled to make sure that we were able to pay those bills and feed my kids. The church is a little different, right? So it's not about me. It's about our church representing what we understand the Bible to be about. And so as a new family looking for a church, I think it starts there. Do they teach truth? Do they understand the Bible to be a guide for life, a revelation of who God is for people? And then beyond that, I think they have to be able to resonate with what they're experiencing on a Sunday to Sunday basis. If you have little kids and you walk into a church that has no understanding, like there aren't any other little kids around, I'm not saying you shouldn't go there, but you might find it challenging. You might find that you're not connecting with other people, or you might be what we call like one of those trailblazer type families in that situation where it's like you have the kids and you're going to be that first family that helps other families come. But generally speaking, I think that you should ask yourself, like, is this a place where we can grow? And then I go so far as to say, ask them, don't hesitate. 3 weeks ago, I had a young guy step into our church, and he kept me there for, we wrap up typically around 11:45 noon. And I was there till 1:30, just answering his questions, like he had questions about our church. And so I would say, like, be that guy, ask a lot of questions, know what you're getting into. Don't be afraid. Just say, hey, what are your doctrinal statements? And what are your, let me see your constitution and your bylaws. How do you guys operate? Who makes decisions, right? Like all of those factors from doctrine to operational those things should all be part of what you consider in choosing a new church. I don't know if that helps.
Let's start with doctrine.
Yeah.
What are a few questions he asked about your particular church's doctrine? What were the answers?
Yeah, so he asked us how we think about the Bible. That was a really important question, for instance. And so at Sunrise, we think of the Bible as not a collection, and this isn't unique to us. We didn't invent this. We're a part of a conviction of understanding the Bible to not just be a story or a collection of disparate stories, but as one redemptive story from beginning to end. And God is working out a plan. That actually changes how we teach the Bible. So instead of us saying, okay, well, this little verse here, would be nicely stitched on a pillow at grandma's house, and it kind of gives me encouragement. Really, we're inclined to ask ourselves, well, how does that story, I don't know if you grew up in church, but like famous Sunday school stories, Jonah and Joseph and Moses and all this, these aren't just like character stories. These are opportunities for us to see like God is working something out. And so I would say that like, that was one question. How do you guys handle the Bible? Well, we handle the Bible by pointing all of it to the plan that God has for the world. The Bible is doing that. So that's one question as far as doctrine. He also wanted to know what we thought about kind of the role of different ministries in the church. What do kids ministries and youth ministries, like how do those like work in our church? And I said, well, we defer all of that to parents first, and then we support the parents. Like we're not trying to supersede the parent. We're trying to help the parent know how to raise their kids and how to know the Bible and how to teach their kids the Bible. And so just some of those types of questions. He asked, I'm trying to think, like he asked us a series of, typically I'm able to hand them a document that says like, this is who we think about God. This is what we think about Jesus. This is not think, but like what we see the Bible teaching these things. Those are some key questions. Who is God? Who am I? Those types of things.
What about the operational aspects of a church? Because people don't realize this sometimes, but a church is effectively a business in that it brings in revenue through donations and it has operating expenses.
Yep.
And somebody's got to be in charge of those decisions. There's got to be oversight. There's got to be accountability. And it also has to be sustainable.
Yeah.
So how do you operate a church financially? How does that work? Everything
you just described is accurate. We operate on donations. We don't get, government subsidy or any kind of thing like that. Our church particular is not connected to a higher denomination that gets any funding from a denomination like that. The denomination that we are a part of is more of a grassroots, ground up denomination. So we support up. The up doesn't support down. So that helps us fund seminaries and colleges and other things that move preachers and pastors and missionaries out into the world, teachers and other things like that. So in our case, like, we rely heavily on the donations and generosity of our people. We have a very generous church. We're fortunate to not have to beg our people at the end of every year to make budget. But when it comes to operational, it's kind of like, I think a church that, if you're going to a church and you have questions about it, you want to see in the leadership of the church a willingness to be transparent about the finances. Where is this money coming from? Where is it going? That's key to us at our church. We, in fact, are so committed to that. Like, we have one individual who sort of oversees the income and one individual that oversees the outgo, and those two individuals, like, they don't work together to sort of like they sort of the right hand, left hand kind of thing. And so our elders, for instance, have input in how we spend that money, but every year our budget is established and then set by the congregation. So we put out, hey, this is what we think we should do with the money this year. The congregation says yes or no. And then every quarter monthly at Sunrise, we publish a treasurer's report that shows people, this is where we're spending our money. This is where, this is how much came in. This is how much went out. You can see if we're ahead or behind, and it's pretty transparent. And we feel like, for us, that has been a really useful, because you see so much in nonprofit world of misuse of funds and mismanagement of those types of things. And it's just a bad look, or worse, it's an absolute, like, it completely makes God look bad. Because the conversations I hear are, people are mad. Oftentimes people are frustrated with religion, and it's like, you're actually frustrated with people that sort of misused religion in a way that made God look bad. And that wasn't God, that was that guy or that lady. And I digress. But that's so having some transparency around those issues helps us to sort of neuter some of that.
Well, let's talk about that for a minute, because my generation doesn't go to church like my parents' generation did. Why do you think that is?
I think they got a glimpse behind the curtain in a lot of ways. I think a lot of churches got away from understanding the role of the church to help to stabilize, the community, to stabilize families, to serve people, to know who God is and what God's will is for their life, and began to see that religion was a vehicle for income. I hate that to sound cynical, but that has happened, and we've seen that a lot in a lot of communities and a lot of churches. Now, it doesn't mean that it doesn't take money to do the ministry, but it can be a disconcerting reality. I think our generation, you said your generation, I think we're of a similar generation, got a lot of religious teaching that had to do with, like, their behavior and less about acquainting them with God. And I'm convinced that when we become acquainted with God, we concern ourselves with what he wants for our lives. But if we get that out of order, then we just sort of chase after doing better, and we find how hard that is. And then we encounter judgment in the church, or we encounter criticism, or we get left behind, or friends that were our friends no longer want to be our friends because of some decision that we made. And I think that our generation saw that in spades. I'll tell you this, though. I'm encouraged by one thing. We're seeing it anecdotally at Sunrise, but I think the numbers on a national level are starting to stabilize, where my son's generation, so I have my oldest son is 22, they're starting to come back to the church. They're starting to see, if nothing else, the number of nuns, so non-religious affiliated people, that number is at least starting to stabilize. It's not continuing to decline. And so young people, we're seeing tons of, like, fruitful college ministry bring young people back to the church. And I think that there's hope. I used to be a real cynic about that. I used to be like, man, the church is in bad hands. And then I've seen some young people come into our church who are just stellar, like in their young 20s, getting married young, having kids, serving their church, getting good job, like getting jobs, contributing to their community. And I've become, in the last couple of years, I've become more excited about like what this next generation can do and what the church is going to look like in 20 years.
Well, I think part of the problem has been that churches.
I'm sorry to talk over you, but I was going to ask, like, what would be your experience? Like, what would be your take? I know you're the interviewer here, but I'm curious.
Well, that's a good question. I'm thinking about it as you're talking.
Yeah.
And I certainly agree with everything you just said. I think I grew up in a Presbyterian church.
Okay.
And, we got drugged to church every week. As a child, I never wanted to go. Okay. And I think a lot of I don't know about a lot of kids, but in my experience, we used to hide in the cupboards and, when mom really wanted to go, then dad raised his voice and we went, and then it was fine. But a lot of times we just didn't want to go to church. Sunday school was not exciting or fun, or we didn't have that fun of an experience, and it was more of a chore for whatever reason. That was my early upbringing in church. Now, like I said, my dad had religious ambitions to be a pastor at some point. My parents are both raised us in a Christian household. I became a Christian at a young age in my teenage years, I remember. But growing up as a young child, we never wanted to go. So I never thrived, or I never was very excited about going to church. But I got very cynical from my church when I started watching my pastor driving around in a Corvette. Mm-hmm. And, I grew up in a very affluent neighborhood. So it was an affluent church, and money was flowing and flowing. And it didn't take me that long to realize, even as a child, that something other than God was in the middle of this scenario. And then there was infidelity in the church leadership, and there were other worldly actions that just that sabotaged that influenced my perception of the church. Yeah. Now, this seems kind of funny, but I remember I was a freshman at University of Connecticut playing baseball. Okay. 2,000 miles away from my family, and I remember I went to there was a Catholic church on campus or off campus, and I went there almost every week on my own and sat in the back. Now, I was baptized Catholic. I'm not a practicing Catholic, but that was the church that was there. And for whatever reason, I felt called to go be in a church and try to be nearer to God when I was alone for the first time in my life. So, my personal trajectory has its own arcs, and I've fallen
Very
short.
Interesting.
Yeah, I've fallen short many a time. But to answer your question, I don't know. I can't speak for our entire generation as to why there's been some cynicism, other than you look at the Catholic Church, you look at abuse of children, and the Catholic Church's history of abuse of children and that we've heard of recently might not have anything to do with other churches, but they all get lumped into the same stigmas. And I think there is some cynicism. The truth of the matter is too, there's it's a business. There needs to be money to create revenue. There's two sides of it. And as a business owner now, I realize that the lifeblood of putting this on is revenue to sustain it. You look around, and I visited a church the other day. They have daycares for the kids, and they have refreshments, and there's costs. Yeah. There's a building, and there's maintenance. And now I know what that looks like when it snows and it costs you $2,000 to handle the driveway once.
Yeah, exactly.
You have to have money. But in some churches, you can feel that a little bit more than in other churches. And one of the questions I want to ask you as a pastor, because you have to balance so many things. You're trying to deliver a message. Mm-hmm. You're trying to reach hearts and minds. Mm-hmm. But you also have to consider the financial needs of the church to sustain that ministry, and that's just a dichotomy that's very difficult. So just to follow up, just to close here, I think that's part of it. I don't really know why our generation has gone away from the church so much. I know that for myself, as I've become a dad, all of a sudden there's a different pull, a much different pull. Yeah. So I think that's part of it. I think maybe growing up in a different generation, or with more TV and other social media and stuff, there's a little bit less of a focus on God, and being in a church. But walking into a church, I felt good. I've seen people I know, and I see community, and I think there's a place for that. I love Midland. What I love about Midland is we have so many churches, we have so many communities, but I've gone years without going to church. So Sunday mornings for me have not felt like they have recently. Okay. And so I would suggest anybody listening who's like me, who hasn't been in church. I'm Christian. I pray. Yeah. I teach my kids. I'm going to ask you about that too, because I need help with that. But I try to share my values with my kids and my Christian values. But I have not had much of a pull in the last 10 years to go to a church until I had kids. Yeah. And now that they're old enough to hear the message, we're going.
Yeah.
And that's part of the reason I was excited to meet with you, was
Yeah.
to hear more about your church and have this conversation. But for people listening who have kind of felt like me, I would suggest taking another shot at church. Go on a Sunday and go sit down and see how it feels and listen to the message and see how your family reacts and open your heart to the message, and amazing things happen. I believe that all throughout my life, I've seen God in certain times, and just like I'm sure you have too, where you open your heart and then all of a sudden you get a message and you correlate the two and then you take action and you see that there was a plan all along. And it certainly isn't a straight line. It certainly isn't all positive and happy, but I would suggest anybody listening to at least maybe open their hearts to the idea, wouldn't you?
Oh, amen, man. There's a church word for you. Amen. Yeah, man. It's funny. If I could respond to that, my wife and I, we celebrated our, so we've been married 26 years this year, but a few years back when we were on I think it was our 22nd, doesn't matter. We took the time to go out and spend some time together. And we took the time to look back on we've known each other since we were, since 97. And it was really interesting to see the line of kind of what you were describing, the line of God's provision, because we've lived all over. We met in Texas, lived in Florida, lived in Washington State. Now we're here. We've been a lot of different places, and a lot of times we're just like, what are we doing here now? And then you look back, and it's like, oh, God had a plan. So just to your point, and so we've been, but yeah, man, to your encouragement, I think. There's an opportunity, it's like, it's never too late. I think people kind of feel like, well, I haven't been in church for a long time, or, you don't know what I've done, or you don't know who I am, or all of those types of kind of, I don't want to belittle it, but sort of excuses or reasons or whatever that people have. And I always like to encourage people that there's no better time than now to make that shift, to take that step. Like you said, get up 10:30 on Sunday morning, or be there by 10:30 and show up, and you just don't know who you're going to encounter. You don't know what you might hear. We see it all the time. Sunrise has been growing over the last couple of years pretty steadily, and we attribute most of that, all of that, to God's provision. But on the ground, the thing that we can see, that we can sort of measure, is that people come, they encounter real people. They hear truth, and in the doing of that, all walks of life, people that have been in church their whole life, and people that haven't been in church in 25 years, and people that have never been in church, with all kinds of struggles, and they're finding that that swath of people are finding that their church experience equally valid, equally valuable, and they're growing in their different ways. And so one of the things we talk about at our church, I've got a daughter who has cerebral palsy, and just an awesome girl, man. She's great. We adopted her from China back in 2016, and just made immense strides in her life. But we talk about that another time. But but we as a family, when we go somewhere, like we go to Disney together, or we go to the store together, or wherever, if we're all together, we move a little slower, because Maylee has a little bit of a limp, right? Like she does her best to keep up, man. I mean, she is, her physical therapist will tell you her catchphrase is, "I'll try." I mean, she tries everything. And I liken that. I often have shared that anecdote with our church, where I say, that's the church is trying to we're trying to slow down for our slowest individual. We don't want to get out in front and leave them behind. We want to come along. We want to move together at a pace that we're all growing, and we're all moving, and so I think, I would hope that if you're listening, if somebody's listening to this, and that's the encouragement that they take away, is that they would find themselves in a place where they meet good Christian people that will help them to grow further in their walk and become a better husband, become a better wife, become a better, whatever, but also, more than those things, to become a more faithful follower of Christ, and a more faithful follower of God's will for their life. And I'm a big believer in the effectiveness and usefulness of the church to that end. I meet a lot of people who describe themselves like you described yourself, and about I pray every day, or I don't, but I don't always necessarily. I have family that doesn't always necessarily go. I'm not in a position to criticize that, judge that, or tell them that they're wrong. But I will say that in my experience, the church has been a place where when we've suffered loss, we've suffered tragedy, we've experienced hardship or joys, like for us as people that have lived a lot of different places, the church has become a community for us to enjoy those things and to be challenged and to be encouraged and prayerfully to be a part of a people that you look around and you go, except for the fact that we all follow Jesus, like why in the world would we all be in this room together? And that's what is so valuable about the church is I think you look at it and you go, that old guy and that young kid, like that young 20-year-old, like probably wouldn't have ever crossed paths except that they're at this church together. And that guy's investing in that guy's life and he's making a huge difference. And I just think that it's just a display of the wisdom of God, the church. So
when are your services? What time?
So we meet on Sundays so we have a Sunday school service at 9:15. And that's for adults. And then and for kids. So kids, we typically break our kids down kindergarten through second grade, third through fifth grade. Then we have a junior high. So that's like 6th, 7th, and 8th. And then high school, 9th and up. And then all of our adults in one class. That's at 9:15. But our regular Sunday AM worship gathering is at 10:30. And that's when we gather together. That's our bread and butter. That's our game day. And so that's on Sundays. We do some other things throughout the week and throughout the month, but those are really the two big things. Our youth group meets on Sunday nights at 5:30, so that's 6th grade and up through high school, and they have some great Bible teaching, but they also do some fun things and try to encourage teenagers in their walk. And then off and on, we try to promote opportunities for families to get together through like game nights and activities or parents' nights out and that kind of stuff. So,
Philip, thanks for being on the Talk Midland podcast.
Thanks for opening up, man. I appreciate you being so honest about your story.
Appreciate you too.
Yeah.